Salutations, everyone. Welcome back to Victoria 3. I'm Lord Forwind, and we are here with a Russia guide. Very heavily requested one. So we'll be covering Russia and all the various aspects of it, and I will try and timestamp all those below so you can simply jump to what you like. If you do like the video, do leave a like, comment, subscribe stuff. Yeah, you know, the old stuff. But it does help. So let's jump right into it. So Russia, at the start of the game, has the third largest GDP in the world, has the third largest population, and to be honest, is just massively huge. However, Russia does have some long-term problems coming with it. It's not particularly industrialized. It does not have very good infrastructure, and it's got some very annoying penalties of Siberian terrain out here as well. Now, we can correct most of those as Russia, but the vast majority of the Russian economy is going to take place in the Europe part of Russia. So, first off, let's talk about how to start reforming our government, because currently this is your standard monarchical government. And, well, the monarchy has received a buff in the new 1.2 patches. It's still not particularly great. So, one of the first things to do is you need to start reforming your government. I would recommend doing one that gets you your armed forces in government, because one of the first laws you definitely need to switch away from is peasant levies to move towards professional armies. And it will take a while for this to balance out. So having the armed forces there is a start. The next thing to do here is to think about swapping from no police to dedicated police force. You don't have to do this now, but in the long run, you definitely do not want to swap to local police force, and dedicated police force will help handle any radicals from standard of living, as well as reduce any turmoil. And there is some turmoil in your land, and you'll be getting more as you expand. Also, Russia, unfortunately, is stuck with serfdom, which now, of course, has more penalties than it did in the previous patches. Mainly, political right of landowners is much stronger. Also, the reduction in infrastructure from population is particularly crippling for Russia, which has relatively low infrastructure already from Siberia. So that's another one you want to switch away from when you can, but it is going to take quite some time to switch away from it. Another thing you need to do here is, if you want to reform stuff, is to go to your intelligentsia and stop the suppression of them. This is because the suppression of them will prevent you from getting reforms, and Russia is in desperate need of some reforms. So in general, what will happen now, if you are on pause from where I am, you would see a general weakening of the gentry here and a strengthening of the intelligentsia, since we're no longer suppressing them. What that means is now we could start working for professional army and other stuff. You can start immediately, and if you can reform this law at the beginning, all the better. But it might be worth waiting a couple months just so that the gentry landowners do lose some political strength. But we'll put it up there as well. Once that's done, getting rid of hereditary bureaucrats at some point will be our goal. Don't do it early because of this bureaucracy population cost. You have a ton of population, so that is an immense change. But you want to strip serfdom. Ideally, you want to switch towards dedicated police force if you can, and then move on from there. Otherwise, though, Russia is in decent shape. It doesn't have any of these police education institutions. There's nothing you can really do about that at this time. And another thing to do is, once you get rid of professional army, is to work towards either colonial resettlement, colonial exploitation. The reason I'm covering all this laws at the beginning of this video is because the reforms are needed to save Russia, but also Russia's expansion. Having the laws start to be changed early will help a lot with that. Because as Russia, you definitely want to try and colonize Sakhalin. So you need colonial resettlement. You need to reform your army. Because if you're stuck on peasant levies, Russia is a paper tiger. And someone like Prussia or Austria can crush you. Plus, once you reform your army, if you want, you can start invading China. And once you colonize Sakhalin here, you do want to start colonies down here in Africa. I do recommend, if you can, go over here in the Cameroon area, because Russia has no access to dyes. Unlike most countries that head to Africa for other resources like rubber, Russia needs to get there sooner than you'd expect for dye resources. And we'll talk more about the economy once we get to that section. Let's talk a little bit about the starting situation here for Russia. So Russia starts at the beginning of the game. You'll have a rivalry. In my opinion, it usually ends up being the Ottomans. Regardless, don't worry about it. You've got some puppets out here in the steppes, headed towards, north of Persia area. You have a personal union over here, the Duchy of Finland. Yes, the same Tsar rules both countries. Honestly, just ignore it. Finland's not going to be able to do much for you, and you can't forcibly annex it. You get an obligation from Greece, which is forgettable, and you have a couple truces here with Circassia and the Caucasian Imamate. You're going to want to take those out at some point. You usually, in my experience, have a decent relationship with China, so it's not worth invading them yet. Improving relations with them tends to be a good plan because we're going to be, as Russia, wanting to invade this area, goal of getting down towards Afghanistan, and keeping the largest nation in the area happy is usually a good strategy. Other than that, Japan over here tends to grow to like you over time. In this case, they hate me. They'll usually ask for a defensive pact or something, but you can kind of forget about it. Austria and Prussia out here, if you can get a defensive pact with someone like Prussia or even Austria, you don't have to worry about it. But to be honest, you can pretty much ignore politics in Europe for quite some time until you're ready to, if you want to, invade the rest of Europe. So I accidentally unpaused, by the way, in case you're wondering why things have advanced. Let's talk about where to start developing your economy next. Surprising to the historical understanding of Russia, Russia's economy at this point in history, 1836, is actually in really decent shape. You've got a large surplus to work with. You've got a relatively stable country that will get more stable because you have high legitimacy of your government. You've got all the natural resources and population you need. It's simply a matter of industrializing your country. So it is very tempting to work on your capital up here in Ingra. Just be aware Ingra does not have the largest population. That is going to be much more down in the areas of Moscow, Kiev, and this area down here. There's also several modifiers you need to be aware of, and they need to be taken into account when you are planning your industry. So Russia has the Russian taiga forests, which are huge. It gives you a huge boost to your logging industry. So you definitely want to build some lumber camp farms and stuff. And if you want, you can just sell that wood to the rest of the world, or you could turn it into furniture and stuff. But regardless, that is a very important modifier for a nation. Now down here in Ukraine, you have the black soil of Ukraine, which increases your agricultural throughput. Why does this matter? Well, this is where you're going to want to build most of your agricultural land rather than elsewhere in your nation. And that's fine because this is also where you've got some of your largest population. Further down here, you have access to the Caucasus mountain range, which, even though it has a huge penalty towards construction, is going to be very important for basically one reason. It has your lead mines down here. It's also got some decent other stuff. But when you're looking for lead in Russia, if we were to go to industry and, resources, lead mines, you'll find most of them outside of Poland is either going to be out here in the Urals where you do not want to really build it, or down here in the Caucasus. So this is where you're going to probably want to put your lead mines, and you do have the population. You can do it in Lesser Poland here, but there are other things you can build in Poland where you have a larger population. Another modifier you need to be aware of is right over here, and that is the Ural mountain range. It's only in 2 areas, which is kind of interesting, even though this is obviously part of the same mountain range. But what this one does give is it does give infrastructure construction penalty, but most importantly, iron mine building throughput. This is where you're going to want to build your iron mines. Now, you're going to want to be a little bit careful here. Perm, yes, as the modifier, but it has a very low population here. And so does the Urals. So you have to be careful. It is super easy to build too many iron mines in one location and run out of population. Normally you want to build high to get that lovely economy of scale stuff going, but you can't really. You can really get away with about 3 or 4 mines more in Perm and a handful more in the Ural region. Outside of that area, you do have other iron mines out here. They're just not going to be as productive. Poland over here is actually not a bad spot if you need to scale up your iron mines, because it has a large amount of peasants, which will slowly convert into unemployed population. And it doesn't have a modifier, but it's better than trying to build out here where you've got either penalties or just no population whatsoever. Now up here, you also have a rather painful modifier. You have the Siberian terrain. This basically means this is the last area of your country you'd want to build in. Thankfully, it also has your lowest population. The only thing you'd ever really want to build up here is maybe fishing wharves. Everything else is terrible. On the topic of fishing, though, you actually have a surprising modifier over here in Russia's Alaska. The Yukon River Salmon Run. Plus 20 fishing industry. This is actually where you want to build your fishing buildings. It's surprising, and most people forget that at this point, Russia controlled Alaska, later to sell it to the US. But in the short run, it's not a bad thing to throw down a fishing wharf or two up there and make some money from it. So let's talk about reforming the industry now. So the first thing we want to do is we want to look at all the various buildings. And if you don't do it already, I do recommend you turn on auto expansion here on virtually every single building, because there's really no reason not to unless you're really going to micro the buildings. And then you need to start looking at the various production methods. Now, Russia has a problem, and that is it basically has almost no tools. So you've got to be careful of massively reforming your entire economy here, because even changing just the rye farms will lead to an import shortage of tools. Now, there are ways around that, and I do recommend that you do swap to those. Just look to see which ones are profitable or not. Focus a little bit on liquor because you have a consumption good on it, and the Russian people do like the liquor. But everything else, you pretty want to make sure that you're using tools. Fishing trawlers here, you can swap over because you do have enough clippers for this. It will just take time to get fully productive again. You do have an additional port here that you could swap over as well. I do recommend that. In terms of your urban industries, now things get slightly more complex here. Yes, you can do sweeteners, which I do recommend. Textile mills, on the other hand, you do not want to do immediately because you do not have a silk supply. You do have silk in your land, and one of the first things you do want to do is build some silk plantations to get it, but not day one. You have more important things day one to do. So just remember that. Do it once you've got a stable economy. Down here, you want to swap to luxury furniture, glassworks, ceramics are worth it. Tooling workshop, you've already got an iron, so just leave it as is. Urban center, you don't want to touch yet. This is going to be one of your first long-term goals in the game, is fixing and improving your glass supply. This is a huge boost in incomes, 15K, if you get enough glass. And right now you don't have enough glass. You do have a little bit of glass work stuff kind of in your starting area and in Lesser Poland. Again, not a high priority at the beginning of the game, but definitely something you want to aim towards, probably before you mass industrialize, by which I mean build more iron mines, coal mines, etc. Because once you do that, you can then also switch to gas lights, which right now would bankrupt us because we don't have any coal. So your problems at the beginning is lack of iron, lack of tools, lack of coal, lack of glass, and silk a little bit. So you want to avoid any change to laws that focus on that outside of tools. There's a reason we don't care too much about tools, and that is because we can simply, at the beginning of the game, import them from China, Prussia, basically just go down this list until the game eventually tells you that the production of the importing of tools is unproductive. And that will temporarily solve your tooling issue. Now, in your, well, what modern day capital of Moscow. At the time, St. Petersburg was the capital. You do have your tooling workshops, and I do recommend you queue up several of those. You'll quickly find that if you start building those tools, you'll also run out of iron. So it's worth queuing up a couple iron mines. And see, we have a penalty here of tools, which is why we want to start building tools immediately. Now, another change is your construction sector here is still wooden buildings. So some people will advocate you just stay on this until you get enough tools that you can then safely swap to iron frame. I recommend swapping faster because it's a huge boost. You double basically your production. And all you have to do is just keep importing tools for a while until you have your own supply. Once you have your own supply, you swap off, you build more iron. Coal, I should talk about coal here because coal can be slightly tricky. It's very tempting to stick it in Perm and Ural since you're already building mines there. You will run out of population. You have better places to build it. Down here in Rostov, Kherson, Volhynia, even Kuban are better places to build it. These two provinces should be your iron mine and virtually nothing else. You could do some logging, but focus on iron because you want the iron mines and you want that lovely plus 20 bonus. I mean, that is huge. So don't build coal in that area. Build coal elsewhere and, of course, concentrate it so you get the economy of scale. You have a very important map mode for the country, which is population. Very few countries have to worry about this. Russia is one of them just because of how empty half your country is. So don't even think about that. Focus here in Europe and your population centers, which is pretty much these 6 provinces, and build up in these areas. This is going to be the core of your country, the core of your industry. Another thing that is very tempting to do to help improve your economy, and I want to argue against it, is multiple people have pointed out that your states are not incorporated in most of Russia. So what you want to do is you do want to incorporate some of the ones in Europe, Saratov, Russian Uralskis, basically through here. You could also focus on Poland. It wouldn't be a bad idea. Other than that, other than Ural here, you want to pretty much ignore all of this until you have a surplus. It is super easy with Russia to overwhelm your bureaucracy. And remember, at some point, you want to change your laws so that you get to dedicated police force, or probably more accurately, you want to reform your colonial fairs so that you get colonial resettlement or exploitation. Exploitation is a little bit interesting for Russia because you have unincorporated states. You do lose some substance output, whereas colonial resettlement as Russia is better because it will actually settle some of your Siberian land. Just pointing that out. If you can, you want resettlement rather than exploitation. Anyway, that is the fundamental basis of where to build up the Russian economy. Outside of that, you want to start getting tools, importing them, building them, get iron, focus on building them. Then you have a choice. You can either up your glass, which will require some sulfur mines, which you have very limited amounts of. So just keep an eye on that. You will have to build sulfur mines and lead mines if you're doing leaded glass and stuff. You're going to then, so you're either doing glass to reform your markets, or you start working on coal to speed up your industry later on. I would probably go for glass first just to make the money. The reason you need the money is coming next. Let's talk technology for Russia. And Russia, surprisingly, has a decent technological base, but will quickly fall behind the West because of their relatively low research rate. Thankfully, and it's still slightly confusing, Russia starts with a very large economy and surplus and a half-decent university in Moscow. It can be worth it after the initial round of tools and iron mines, before you do glass, if this is what you want to focus on. You can kind of do both because Russia's pretty big and rich, is to build up your university several levels. The reason is you're at 50 here, you can support up to 73. You want to try and get as close to 73 as fast as you can. You have very poor literacy, which does cap it. So you won't be able to keep up with the Western powers for a while, but at least you won't fall as far behind as Russia did historically. So what that means to your economy is you're going to have to spend some time on the universities, which can slow down the rest of your economy. But if you are playing with the private construction mechanic enabled autonomous investment, the AI will work on developing the rest of your economy so you can focus on getting your industry and government and tech production up and running early on. In terms of tech, you have to make a choice pretty early on, and it is extremely important. Are you going to colonize as Russia? You don't have to. Russia can be just a land European power. However, you will lack access to rubber, to some oil, and lack easy access to large amounts of dye. I recommend Russia go colonial, just so that you don't have those problems, but it is up to you. That means if you are going colonial, the first tech you really want to head towards is quinine. You want to get that anti-malaria stuff, because everywhere you can colonize in the world, basically, other than Sakhalin, the peninsula near Japan, is gonna have malaria. And malaria is a killer to your expansion. Even though you have a huge population, it will still take you forever to expand. If you focus quinine early on, and you get it, you will massively outpace the other colonizers who don't have it. And first off, if they do have it, they don't have your population, meaning you will colonize faster than they do. Sadly, you'll only really be able to afford a level 1 institution as Russia, not level 2. It's all combined. After you focus on that, you'll probably be running across a bureaucratic shortfall, meaning central archives here is going to be extremely important for you. If you want to do it differently, you could go for central archives first, then for quinine, because you'll get this sooner, solve your bureaucratic problems, allow you to put more institutions out, but you'll start colonizing sooner, but you won't be able to colonize as fast. It's kind of your choice. That is if you want to do colonization. Afterwards, banking, stock exchange, fill out the rest of these basic techs before you go anywhere near military or production. In terms of military tech, you are actually pretty advanced. You're one away from both skirmish infantry and percussion caps, which allow munitions and you need for skirmish infantry. In my couple test runs I did on Russia, I found that I got general staff without having to spend any research on it at all before I got quinine. That might have just been my experience, but you tend to get those military techs pretty early on. You get it after, I think, paddle steamer, though. You won't have percussion cap, or if you get one, vice versa, you have to research the other one to really use better infantry. The reason that matters is if you get skirmish infantry and you want to invade China, that is the point at which you can just overrun China. China will not be will be stuck on peasant levies. You will have massively superior army. You have an army that's about the same size. You can easily overwhelm China, which is important because that's one of the journal entries for Russia, which I will hopefully remember to discuss later on. So anyway, don't worry too much about military other than general staff and percussion caps. Anyone else who's going to fight you is probably intimidated by the size of your starting military, which is pretty considerable for a nation in the world. It's not quite on the level of some of the what the European powers will hit. You're slightly bigger than Austria, and currently you're equal in strength to Austria, but that will fade as Austria builds up. But for an AI, you should be safe for a while. In terms of production technology, this is where if you go for colonization first, you have to dedicate to that. If you don't, you want to focus over here. You want to grab lathe. You'll get it automatically over time. It'll take a little while. But if you're going to go for building up your industry before colonizing, start with lathe here. It gives you a lot of benefits in terms of your economy. Be aware that stuff of these like dye workshops and leaded glass require you to get dye and get lead, both of which you do have, but you don't have built up yet, so it will take time. However, the lace for the furniture manufacturers can give you a huge economic boost, which you might need at the time. Afterwards, you've got a long way to go. The first one I recommend, intensive agriculture here, so that you can set up some grazing ranches and get some fertilizer coming out of that. That can be very important for the country. It was nerfed in the recent patch, so you will probably need to build a chemical plant. But Russia has so much agricultural land. You don't need to go heavy into fertilizer plants early on or chemical plants. You can just build massive amounts of grazing ranches, which you kind of want to do anyway because it's usually half decently profitable to do. Afterwards, probably want to grab atmospheric engine because since you have population issues in your mining areas, this will increase the output of them. It will require some more employment, but overall, it will help your economy at that point. Water tube boiler here is another one that can be quite useful as well when you get to it, but don't worry about it. At that point, you should just be able to just keep researching everything. If you built up your universities, you'll have plenty of tech points. You'll get a nice spread from Europe, and you'll be able to catch up to the Europeans. And then it's just a matter of waiting for your literacy to tick up and building more universities. Russia has a stupidly good economy right now. So long as you play properly and don't overwhelm your bureaucracy, you should be all set. I didn't mention it earlier, but in terms of other starting things for your industry, usually we're throwing down a couple construction sectors, either in your capital or more likely in Moscow here, just so that you do build up faster. Make sure that you save several thousand gold every month. You don't want to go bankrupt. You do have a nice pool of 4 million, but you don't want to lose money because you will have trouble later on if your economy goes south. Let's talk about expansion for Russia. So Russia is in a unique position, very similar to like France and Spain, where you don't have any specific objectives for expansion. You do have one, and this is a good time to talk about it. You have this ruler of the East. So once you research nationalism, this will fire. If you don't own Outer Manchuria and all these others, you will gain a claim over here on this region. Historically, Russia, Japan, China all kind of skirmished over Manchuria. In the end, historically, Japan won, leading up to World War II. You have missions to take this area to help build up your Pacific fleet. If you're allies with China, you might not want to do it, but once you get skirmish infantry, you can easily overwhelm them. That is pretty much your only expansionist goal in terms of where to expand. Russia is lacking in content like so much of the game, and I assume this will be reworked, at which point I'll probably have to remake this guide, but that is really your only big expansion thing. You also have build a railway across Siberia. Just do it when you get railways. So what that means, though, is Russia can kind of expand wherever you'd like. I do, however, recommend certain moves at the beginning. So you have these subjects over here, right? They're not particularly good. They will build up their lands a little bit, but let's be honest, their lands are pretty much trash as is. Oops, sorry, let me get to... Oh, come on, game. Sometimes this game's distance is confusing. They don't have a lot of troops. Currently, they are, under your sway as puppets. They're not particularly happy about it. One of the first things I kind of recommend you do is just annex them. Start a diplomatic play. You should be fine. In my experience, if China likes you, the Ottomans have other issues. Persia's really the only person who might do anything. Annex one, annex the other, annex the third. You'll have to fight a war with them, but you're starting troops alone. Don't even bother with 90. Just send in like 46 here. Just raise these two. They will absolutely crush your subjects. You'll pick up some lands. You'll gain not much in GDP, but more importantly, it will give you access to the others in this region. Khiva area. Khiva can be easily conquered. Bukhara can be easily conquered. Kohan can easily be conquered. At that point, China will either start to be weakened or you'll want to start expanding towards China. If you're going to conquer China, which you have a better chance of conquering China than most other nations because you're already huge, although the bureaucracy cost is massive. Let's just be aware of that. The bureaucracy cost is huge. If you do want to get Beijing at relatively quickly, assuming you've got wonders and stuff on. And if you're going to stay a monarchy, you want it because of the legitimacy from head of state and government will help you stay stable as you keep expanding. If you don't want to go into China, the route here is to Persia. Persia is the big kind of goal. I can't really show it to you at the moment, but Persia has some oil and you want oil. Russia has oil historically, but why not have more? This area is pretty easy to expand into and arguably to hold on to. The Ottomans won't expand into this area for quite some time because they're dealing with Egypt, and Egypt is dealing with the Ottomans. The East India Company has bigger problems in holding on to India, and if you do it quickly enough, Great Britain will not get its interests in the area going. And if you overwhelm this area, you'll be massive, you'll be huge, you'll be even richer. And more importantly, you will have kind of cut off east to west access, so that hopefully there won't be too much trouble going this way. It'll all have to go through you. If you colonize, you want South Cameroon, but also you can colonize Kenya. Kenya is important because it gives you access to this area of the map. You're large enough and strong enough, and if you've been building your economy properly, you can pretty well wage war through here, and most people won't care. I didn't get any level of infamy, really, from conquering these one after another, because they're so small and so poor early on. Outside of Persia, you can just keep conquering them. No one really cares, other than the neighbors. Be aware that if you do go into the Sikh Empire, though, East India Company will care at that point. You also could have the fun of making a puppet out of Persia or something, which you could do theoretically at the start of the game, which would be a very interesting play considering how weak they are. Just make sure you get away from peasant levies first. Let's talk a little bit more about some subtle nuances with Russia and their laws and stuff. Currently, you have state religion. Your state religion is kind of unique in the sense that you have a building here in Moscow, St. Basil's Cathedral, which makes your Orthodox Church more politically strong than they would be otherwise. This, to a large degree, means that almost any government you make up, at some point, the Orthodox Church is going to be strong. It can be worth just sitting on state religion for pretty much the whole game. You will have good authority, you'll have less radicals, the Orthodox Church will be pretty loyal to you, assuming you don't offend them in other ways. And if you play it right, they won't obstruct too many of your laws. Their opinions on lots of your stuff is relatively minor. They support, some of the conservative values, but not all of them. The Russian Orthodox Patriarchy is slightly different. The big issue for you early on is that they support serfdom, and you want to get rid of that. It's just you'll have to offend them at that point. Outside of that, you probably don't need to reform your laws that much. The fact they've got that extra little clout keeps them stable. Honestly, in my experience with Russia, once I got rid of serfdom here, and I worked my way away from traditionalism, which, if you can, you want to get away from once you've got a good bureaucracy. I shifted to interventionism, I think, or maybe it was agrarianism. And I reformed some of these institutions. I pretty much didn't feel the need to swap away from autocracy to actually get too many political parties. If you do, landed voting should be as far as you need to go. Sitting on the Chinese Forbidden Palace, St. Basil's Cathedral, you can actually maintain and keep a strong landholders Orthodox Church while still getting through some decent reforms, at which point you're pretty much set for the game. If you want to go communist and, try and recreate the USSR earlier on, you can definitely work your way towards it. You can actually flip from monarchy very early on as Russia if you do it right and pull off a presidential republic, at which point, first off, be aware that your government's going to be horribly illegitimate for some time. But if you do, that's the first step, at which point you can work your way to council republic. Another thing to consider is swapping from a monarchy to a theocracy. And that's because you've got a pretty decent political strength from your clergy that you can actually pull this off. The rest of these, you have some issues with doing it early on. Theocracy is usually one you can pull off without offending every other political party. I don't know why theocracies are that way, but if you're going to work your way towards it and break the power of the landholders, so you get, communism or the equivalent of it in this game, that's one of the first things you need to do. The next stuff to do is start working on, child laborers, and you're going to need to get towards workers' protection, which is going to take time to get to human rights. If you get to human rights early on, which I wouldn't recommend because it's so deep in some of your trees, you want to obviously hit socialism here so that you start getting the increased standard of living, so you get more radicals and you'll unlock the Communist Party. But the human rights, in terms of, let's see, I always forget where human rights is. Human rights being here, it will take you time to get, but you'll have researched some of the stuff above it, and if you take a while to do it, most of the early stuff will spread. You can snag that, you can work your way towards socialism, at which point you can start flipping over. Be aware though, even if you flip, you still need a strong economy. It's really an economic game. So rewatch the economic session I talked about, economic industry, and build it up. Russia has every natural resource you need and all the population you need, and it's in a much better shape than, say, China is, meaning it's super easy to be the largest industry in the world. You can keep pace with or even surpass Great Britain after the first 10 or 12 years. Just focus on building up your starting industry, iron, coal, tools. Take a slight detour to either snag glass or education, so you get more innovations. And then from that, just start building everywhere. I got to 200 construction in the first 20 years, and I was still making money. It's really ridiculous. Russia, played properly, is easy mode right now. It's one of the easier countries in the game. And you can expand anywhere you like. If you don't want to expand down here, you could technically start fighting Prussia and Austria. Be aware that Prussia at the start of the game is so militarily superior, you're going to have to devote to military tech. Austria is fightable. If you want, you can try and invade Norway and Sweden. Just be aware that you are going to have some slight issues if one of them joins the British or the Prussian market, which I see happen more often than not. But early on, Sweden is a little bit isolated, so it is invadable. China, of course, is super easy to conquer. You want to take this area from China first, so you get the head of government if you're staying monarchy, and you get the ruler of the East. Korea falls in a heartbeat. Japan's a little bit harder now that you can't colonize into Japan, but just invade. You get a superior military. It's quite possible for Russia to take over this whole area. I think by the time I stopped one of my runs, I controlled everything outside of India, basically, in Asia, all the way down to, Siam. I didn't obviously mess with Spain, but I did all of that, and I colonized most of Africa, and I still had a stupidly booming economy. It's easy. Just break the landholders initially, then you can re-strengthen them later. Just get away from serfdom, and the world's your oyster, really. Serfdom's your biggest problem. Anyway, that's it for the guide on Russia. I don't think I have anything else to mention. Not really. The only other thing I can think of is make sure you remember to export your excess resources. Entirely possible to be both agrarian or military or industrial. Do whichever you like, or do both. That is it for this guide. So thank you guys all for watching. Again, if you liked it, like, comment, subscribe, all that great stuff. And check out the other guide videos I've done on this. And hopefully I will be doing some more in the future, and I will definitely be back if they rework Russia at any point. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.